Welcome,
Hello?
everyone. I'm going to ask you to please mute your microphones so we don't have a whole lot of background noise. My name is Dave Myers. I'm the director of the Berks Alliance, and we're very pleased to have this program here today. I'm going to turn it over very briefly to John Weidenhammer, the chair of the Berks Alliance, for welcome comments, and I'll come back to you in a second.
So good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining the call today. As you know, this topic is one of great interest in our community. In fact, I think in the 3.5 years that the Berks Alliance has been doing these community conversations, we've had more people register for this program than for any other one that we've done so far, which is an indication of the great interest in the county strategic plan, which I think is going to shape some of the things that happen in our community for quite a number of years into the future. So thanks for being with us. I also want to thank our presenters. I want to thank Dave Myers also for his time in organizing this really important topic. As you know, we do record these programs, and we'll very shortly after the program have this posted on the Berks Alliance website. And also everybody that registered for the program will get a copy of the link to the recording once we're through. But again, I can't thank enough Pam and our presenters for their willingness to put this program together on a really an important topic, but also a game changer for our community as well. So Dave, back to you for the ground rules and the introduction of our speakers.
Great, thank you, John. This is a great opportunity for us to imagine the future of Berks. The ground rules are fairly simple. We ask you to mute your microphone. We ask you to keep your camera on if you can, so we can see that we're dealing with live people. We ask you to use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to submit your comments and questions. We will get to those after the formal presentation. We'll be providing all the comments and questions that we receive to the county for them to make use of. We will, as John mentioned, we will be posting this on the Berks Alliance website. We'll be sending a copy of the recording of the event to everybody who registered for this program for today. And we will also be sharing it with BCTV. So you've got lots of different ways to watch it as many times as you want to do that. So with that, we'll get started. I want to introduce Pam Shupp-Mennett. Pam is the soon-to-be Director of Community and Economic Development for Berks County. She can talk a little bit more about that in a second, but Pam, to you.
Dave, thank you so much. I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of this Alliance Forum today because Berks Alliance is and has become an incredible community development and economic development partner in Berks County. So thrilled that you are providing this platform for issues like these and others to be brought to the attention of our community. I really want to thank the commissioners of Berks County who committed quite some time ago to an economic development strategic plan and the creation of it, and also to the process. One of the things that we've been trying to do in this process clearly is to bring people to the table who haven't previously been asked to come to a table to help plan our future of Berks County and to plan their own future as Berks County residents. That would not have happened if we didn't have a recognition quite some time ago that economic development goes hand in hand with a lot of other things that we thought would be separate. At one point in time, we say community and economic development, but we treated them in very siloed ways. This is really an attempt to bring together economic development, workforce, community development, and there's also a housing section of this as well. We're recognizing very clearly the interrelatedness of all of these focus areas, and so pleased to be able to bring that together in a strategy that has very implementable items at the end of this. And though the county has taken the lead on this plan, this would not have come together and will not be successful without the cooperation, partnership, and participation of all of our residents in Berks County and also very important organizations who are doing such great work in the community. So we couldn't be more excited. One of the reasons we chose Fourth Economy as a consultant to work with the county is because we wanted to embrace their approach and understanding of how to bring people to the table who have not typically been asked to be at the table. So I'm going to turn it over now to Victoria Phipps. Victoria is the Vice President of Engagements and Impact for Fourth Economy. And I think as she goes through this presentation, it will be a very clear indicator of why we chose to work with this very dynamic consulting group. I'll say a few more words at the end, but Victoria, please go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pam. And Dave, thank you so much for the invitation to present today. It is such a pleasure to be with all of you. And it's honestly been an honor these last couple of months working alongside Pam and the planning team, as well as many a number of stakeholders in the community, which we'll discuss in a little bit, to bring this plan forth. So for about the next hour, we'll talk a little bit about the process that brought us to this point, but also really delve into some of this plan's strategic recommendations, and of course, happy to answer any questions. Bear with me for just a second while I share my screen. Okay, are you all able to see that? Fabulous, thank you for the head nods. I always appreciate that. So Pam teed up a good bit of this, but one of the things that we really tried to acknowledge in our approach to the plan was acknowledging the breadth and depth of all that Berks County encompasses. When we think about urban areas versus rural spaces, when we think about rich legacy, but also emerging industry. When we think about small business versus major industrial creation and opportunities for investments in infrastructure, but also thinking about the diversity of the Berks County population, thinking about hundreds of years of history, and also thinking about new Americans who are settling in Berks County. It's their first touch point on US soil. So really wanting to recognize the richness of all that is reflected in the county and make sure this strategy reflects that. So of course, we didn't do this alone. There was a project team that was keeping us on track, serving as our guardrails in the bowling alley, so to speak. Of course, Pam, who has been such an incredible resource for us in these past couple of months. Derek Harris, who has served as a bit of her counterpart, and I think has been such a helpful counterpart for members of our team. And then Ken Pick, Ashley Showers, Jeremy Zaborowski, and David Hunter, who all were our sort of bi-weekly committee helping to bring this together. In addition to Fourth Economy, we were joined by two other firms to help round out this work. Lancaster County's EDC, they have a Center for Regional Analysis that helps to round out a good bit of the economic analysis components, as well as Connect the Dots, who is a community engagement firm based out of Philadelphia, who helped to ensure that we had a robust community engagement process spanning countywide. We also had a broader advisory committee. These individuals really helped to poke holes along the way. We would share key data insights, points of feedback from the interview processes, summaries of the survey responses to really get their feedback, to understand if the things that we were seeing could be validated in their lived experience, and to get their suggestions on where they thought the plan should ultimately head. So thank you so much for those of you who were able to participate in this body. Last but not least, over 75 community members participated directly within the creation of this plan. There were virtual workshops, there were small group sessions, there was an in-person community tour, as well as a number of one-on-one conversations that really helped to ensure that the plan's contents were right-sized for your community. So thanks once again to everyone who had an opportunity to participate and touch this work in recent months. So let's talk a little bit about the process. We really, once again, tried to reflect the breadth and depth of the county in the way we designed this process, but also wanted to ensure that any strategies resulting from this work are anchored in fact. So we started with establishing a baseline. And at our firm, that means we're looking at the data. So Fourth Economy has a bit of a unique approach. We value the qualitative just as much as the quantitative. So while we were digging into economic data relative to the county, we also were going out and talking to folks. We wanted to understand, what does lived experience look like, both for newer residents or folks who might have lived in Berks County their entire lives, the last 50 or 60 years. We wanted to see, where does that lived experience compare and contrast with what we're seeing in the data? Are there things that can be validated? Is there dissonance? And if so, can we uncover why? So we spent the first few weeks of our work really establishing that baseline understanding, what is happening in the Berks County economy today. We also recognize that Berks is not starting from scratch. There were a number of plans that have come before us. So we wanted to review those plans, understand what was successful and what wasn't. Why did things work and why didn't they work? To make sure we were building a roadmap for success beyond the touch point. From there, we thought about creating a vision. We wanted to make sure we were communicating with key stakeholders and residents. So we developed a website to provide project updates and materials. We also featured a community survey, which over 450 people participated in. And we started to receive input on some of the various things that had emerged within that baseline. So certain questions bubbled up relative to housing, for example, or relative to the work of talent attraction and retention. We wanted to get some refined insights and started to do that and come into a space of creating some goals, a space of creating some big focus areas that we could really deepen around. As we think about defining goals and strategies, we hosted what we called build sessions. These are large meetings in which we strive to co-create a solution, build a solution to a challenge we've identified. So we orient those sessions around what we call how might we statements. How might we increase capital access for local small businesses? How might we increase the percentage of people who are of working age in Berks County? How might we help to ensure that senior residents are able to age in place? These type of questions are considered, and the community really helped us to come up with the areas that they thought might be most viable and most impactful within the community. We also sought to engage strategy champions. So as it became clear what the nodes of the plan were going to be, we recognize, as Pam said at the beginning, that the county is not going to be solely responsible for the success of this plan. There are going to be individuals and organizations that have to own core components for this to work and for this work to advance. So we wanted to identify those strategy champions. Who are those people who are going to be critical, both to provide feedback while we're developing these strategies, but also to own core components moving forward. And you'll see when the final plan is released, there's a lot of talk about who's the lead organization, who's the facilitating organization, how are we going to advance things moving forward. And ultimately, all of that work bubbled up to a set of strategic recommendations, which we'll talk about a little bit today. Lastly, we want to move towards action. As a firm, we never want our plans to sit on a shelf and collect dust. We want them to be easily implementable and immediately implementable. So we talk a lot about the need to create investable stories, sort of how are we writing these strategies and are we designing them in a way that will galvanize activity, that will create more immediate impact. Of course, along with that, we want the plan to be beautiful and compelling and something people want to pick up and read. So we spent a good bit of time on design. And lastly, we thought about metrics and impact. It's very hard to know if you've been successful at something if you aren't measuring it. So we spent a good bit of time with the planning team thinking about, if we do our jobs well, how will we know it? How will we define success? And so identifying some of those indicators that will show where the needle might be moving in respect to some of our suggested strategies. So I've touched on this a little bit, but these were some of the engagement touch points that we had across the process. So of course, the baseline analysis, looking at the data, looking at past reports, hosting a county-wide listening tour. This actually occurred back in August of last year, which feels like a lifetime ago. But actually getting out there and entertaining members of community, asking their thoughts, getting their perspective, going out and meeting them in their neighborhoods, in spaces that they interact with every day. So we visited a variety of sites and businesses and engaged with roughly 30 community members on a one-on-one basis within that. Interviews, I've talked about a good bit. The online survey, which had over 69 municipalities represented within it, and then the build sessions, which of course were a huge component of the strategy development process. So in thinking about the data, there were 4 big insights that really served as anchors across the entire plan. It's no joke to anyone that the labor market has been complex post-COVID-19, certainly, but there are additional things that have been transpiring economically that have made that labor market even more complicated. One of the things that we saw specific to Berks County was this sort of unequal dynamic between job seekers and job market. This ratio was one of the things that we honed in on very early, where we saw that for every 1 job created by industry, there were 7 vacancies within the labor force. So even if we were doing the work of job creation, which is something we in the economic development world talk about a lot, we were going to continue to hemorrhage talent. And so we needed to figure out how we can stop the bleeding, so to speak. Is there a way to focus on retention of talent while we are doing some job creation? If the current trends were to move forward, we would see roughly a 4% turnover between 2018 and 2028. So we want to change that dynamic. We also did a land use assessment and found that land availability was a challenge. So obviously, conservancy, land preservation is a large conversation and large priority within the county. What we found in doing our land use assessment was that only 22% of the county's land actually supports commercial and residential activity. So in many ways, there is a restricted environment in which we can make investments into things that are going to economically generate impact for the county. So we have to think strategically about how we do that. Housing stock also is not meeting housing demand. So we saw within the data and looking at the housing that there's a significant age relative to a number of the available housing units. Only roughly 3% of all units in Berks were built in 2010 or later, while 25% were built in the early 1900s, 1939 or earlier. Of course, building standards in the earlier 1900s were significantly different than building standards today. The needs of sort of modern living environments are different than they were a century ago. So there is a sort of mismatch as we see Berks County demographics changing and a lack of sort of housing availability that does meet modern requirements. So you'll see some strategies relative to that. And lastly, we saw that diversity and inclusion was actually a key to Berks' economic success. Relative to population growth, that can be directly attributed to the Latino community. Without an increase in that population, Berks would have seen a reduction in population by roughly 15,000 over the course of the last decade. So the Latino community is really a key to both maintaining population levels, but also maintaining economic progress. So we have to think strategically about how we create a sense of inclusion and create a sense of belonging and a sense of connectivity to opportunities within Berks County and the community at large. So all of that work culminated in 6 big focus areas, which will be sort of where we spend the remainder of our time. Business, industry, and growth, of course. Small business and entrepreneurship, which we really wanted to pull out because we wanted to have some very dedicated strategies specific to smaller entities, which, as we all know, create the vast majority of new jobs in this country. Infrastructure and land use, talent and economic mobility, thinking both about talent that is already in the county, either folks that are born and raised or who are current residents, but also people that we might attract from outside, looking at housing, and then of course, placemaking, thinking about, raising more awareness of Berks County as a destination, both for people who are in the immediate region, but also who might be coming from further away. There were also 6 key principles that we really wanted to advance across the full strategic portfolio. So we wanted to invest in strategies that supported the retention and creation of what we refer to as opportunity jobs. This is a term that was developed by the Brookings Institute that refers to jobs that pay a livable wage specific to this community. So we don't want to just create any job. We want a good job, a job that will sustain a life, a job that will enable someone to raise a family, a job that will enable someone to not need 2 or 3 other jobs. So really prioritizing these quote unquote opportunity jobs. We wanted to prioritize investment and redevelopment activities. So thinking about vacant or underutilized properties that could be key assets. Once again, only 22% of the county's land is available for economic investments of this nature. So can we maximize the use of assets that are already in existence through redevelopment? Investing in development that increases the tax base of Berks County. Of course, we want to continue to expand the economy in Berks. So making sure that everything we're doing is with an eye towards increasing that tax base, ensuring that there are economic resources that are helping to make the engine run. Ensuring public accountability and planned implementation. So once again, thinking about transparency, thinking about reporting, thinking about the mechanisms that are going to indicate success and help to keep us all accountable. Leveraging the county's position as a regional partner. So recognizing that the County of Berks, once again, cannot do all of this by themselves, but they also do hold a very unique position in being able to establish guidelines, to provide resources, and to build connective tissue with the municipalities that comprise the county, but also with their peers in surrounding counties. So thinking about the County of Berks as a regional player that can wield influence. And lastly, recognizing and supporting the growing diversity of the Berks community. In talking with individuals who are residents of Berks, we heard time and time again how much the diversity was viewed as an asset. Across the plan, we really want to think about how this connects with some of this economic activity and what we might be able to do to ensure that it remains an asset that grows over time. So across the plan, you'll see mention of goals. Here are the 6 that correspond with those 6 focus areas, which actually I think we have them at the top of the section. So we'll roll through that way. So jumping right into business and industry growth, the goal there is really to encourage industrial and commercial redevelopment. The industry mix in Berks has been quite steady for quite some time, but we want to see more output. We want to ensure that industry producers and industry partners have what they need to continue to grow, and that we are investing in the redevelopment of spaces to either enable people to expand or to attract others to the county. So here's a look at what you can expect to see in the plan itself. This is actually a direct snapshot from the plan's designs. This will look very familiar once the full plan has been released. Essentially, these dark blue lines reflect the top line strategy that's being suggested. The white lines are the action items that can support that strategy. And then the sort of implementation years are also reflected. So this plan has a 5-year horizon. So you'll see things that are implemented in year 1, 2, and 3. And then there's room for additional things to be envisioned beyond year 3. So first step, relative to business and industry growth, we're looking at investing in site development where market and environmental conditions call for a public role. So once again, recognizing that the county has a specific role to play, and let's make sure they operate within that sphere. So promotion and expansion of the JEEP process. Thinking about doing some asset mapping relative to infrastructure assets or gaps in water, sewer, electric, gas, and broadband. Supporting authorities to rehab and reuse sites, once again, across the county, and creating some priorities for a site reuse program. And creating a formal site reuse investment program that can support the expansion of existing and new business or housing projects that require some support for land acquisition or other aspects. Next, we look at supporting growth in industries that offer opportunity jobs. So once again, as we're thinking about provision of resources to companies that are already present in Berks or companies that might be attracted to Berks, can we ensure that they are creating opportunity jobs and we are using our limited resources? Can we ensure that they are going to maximize impact for our community? So you see some industries and sectors reflected here where there are the highest paying jobs. So can we grow opportunities there? And can we work with some industry partners to also ensure that local people have connectivity to these opportunities? And then support for agribusiness industry growth. So thinking about agribusiness as an emerging area of opportunity, thinking about value-added production, and looking at the county's role in providing opportunities for advancing farm production and financial resources for new product development in that area. So these are the process metrics and economic indicators, and for each of these sections, we'll have these reflected as well. So some are more programmatic and tactical in nature. Did we create the thing we set out to do? But some of them are economic indicators as well. So here you see a little bit of both. So 2 process metrics, creating the priorities for the site reuse program, which of course will be led by the county, and then creating that investment program to correspond with it. And then on the economic indicator side, having a decrease in business contraction and relocation. So thinking about retention of more of our local businesses and maintaining their current size of not expanding it. So traditional business retention and expansion work. And then an increase in real GDP. And so for those of you who are not familiar with that term, GDP refers to gross domestic product. It's a very common indicator that we use in the economic development sphere. And basically it refers to the value, the dollar value of things being produced in the county. So it often is a perfect indicator for where the economy is at. So we want to see an increase in real GDP over time. Within the plan, you'll see a baseline for where Berks is today, so that we can use that to say, okay, year 1, how are we doing? Year 2, how are we doing? By the time we get to year 5, we can really have a comprehensive look at how did we shift the needle over the course of this plan. So next up, looking at small business and entrepreneurship. The goal here is to support small businesses and encourage entrepreneurship to enable the creation of a few different types of ventures. First, looking at high growth ventures, so thinking about scalable entrepreneurial entities that might grow to become large job creators or potential disruptors. Thinking about Main Street amenities. So Berks has so many incredible main streets. Thinking about the local coffee shops, the local retail boutiques, restaurants, bookstores, making sure that there's true quality of place and that those small businesses have the resources that they need to thrive. And then thinking about wealth building opportunities for residents and viewing entrepreneurship and the creation of a culture of entrepreneurship is directly connected with that. So small business priorities, we want to increase government and school district spending with local businesses within Berks County. So one best practice that we see nationally is a focus on procurement, on spend with local businesses. We know municipal governments, county governments, school districts, they're constantly buying supplies and constantly having to procure things. Can we turn a dedicated eye towards procuring things from local vendors, really as a means of helping to grow those small businesses? So 3 action items associated here: promotion of bid opportunities, so making sure local businesses are aware, making the bid process easier for local small businesses to apply, so potentially reducing the barrier to entry for local businesses, and then supporting business-to-business procurement, including agricultural producers. So once again, thinking about when we are buying things for our businesses or needing to procure things for our businesses, can we do that in a B2B capacity with local small business? Second large strategy step, supporting small business and entrepreneurial ecosystem mapping and strategic plan efforts. So there's some of this work that is already underway. This basically acknowledges that, but also suggests that we need to amplify that work. We should continue to support the development and understanding of a more formal entrepreneurial ecosystem. So this would be the ecosystem of providers that are designing programs and resources to support small businesses, entrepreneurs, and founders. So we want to raise awareness once again. In talking to a number of small business owners, they didn't really know where to look. They didn't know if resources that they needed that would be helpful for their businesses were available in the county. Very frequently they were, but they didn't really know how to access these entities or where they should go for more information to find out if they were an appropriate fit for them. So raising awareness of entrepreneurial and small businesses opportunities across the board. Identifying pathways to engage the Latino community. So in particular, we saw great trends of entrepreneurship within that community, but we also saw a lack of connective tissue between that community and some of the entities that are providing direct support and resource to small businesses. So ensuring that there are more pathways to meet that community's needs and to ensure participation. And then celebrating successful small businesses. So a lot of what we heard, both from the economic development community as well as small business owners, was that people really weren't aware of how much great stuff was actually happening in Berks. They wanted to hear the stories of the local business that has gone from no employees to 10 employees. They wanted to hear the story of, you know, the local business was a really successful exit and created some local wealth. They wanted to hear the story of the new Main Street business that everyone's excited about. So creating more formal channels to tell those stories, increasing that culture of entrepreneurship, and hopefully encouraging others to follow suit and become business owners and job creators for the community. 2 additional strategy steps here: improving access to financial resources and market access for Main Street and high growth potential businesses. So of course, capital is the lifeblood of any business. We look at capital and we look at talent. Berks, in comparison both to its surrounding counties as well as in comparison to the state, is undercapitalized. So we saw lower levels of small business lending specific to the county of Berks than we did elsewhere in Pennsylvania. So that's something that we want to change if we want to make entrepreneurship and small business a core component of our economy. So we need to foster awareness and of course increase utilization of existing capital resources in talking with some of the folks who do lending towards small businesses. They felt as though they had more capacity and that folks just aren't really taking full advantage. So we need to increase utilization and awareness. But we also need to create some new types of capital access that might not come from traditional financial institutions. So thinking about higher risk micro-lending funds for startups. So if you are a very small entity just getting started up, you're not really ready for a formal or traditional small business loan, is there a micro-lending entity that can provide you with a little bit of seed capital to get you going? But also thinking about the development of an investors network specific to the angel level of investment. So you've achieved a little bit of traction, you're starting to eye scale, you're not necessarily interested in taking on traditional forms of debt, but you do need a little bit of fuel to sort of get you to that next level. We didn't really see much that was at that next level of funding. So really looking at some examples from across the country of angel networks that leverage local high net worth individuals to create some more targeted investment, particularly as we consider that high growth type of venture. Next, we want to support small businesses working to scale their operations. So potentially exploring partnerships with the SBA and their Emerging Leaders Initiative, which this really speaks to is creating some more opportunities for entrepreneurial education, cohort-based learning, accelerator programs, for example, really designing things that will help small business leaders to increase the efficiency of their operations, but also really turn an eye towards growth. So metrics relative to the space, of course, we want to increase the level of government purchasing. So that's something that would be directly in the county's wheelhouse that they can do themselves, but also can encourage other municipal governments to take advantage of and follow their lead. On the economic indicator side, we want to increase the amount of capital deployed into small businesses and startup businesses. So once again, establishing a baseline for that, tracking it on an annual basis. And then increasing the number of small businesses that are created. So we want to at least be on par with the US average. So right now we have a 7.8% business birth rate. We want to get that closer to the US average, which is roughly 10%. So once again, tracking that over time to see how do the investments move the needle. Infrastructure and land use. So here we want to support land development that increases our local tax base. First up, we want to enhance the permitting process to better preserve the county's natural resources. This is directly connected to Berks County Conservation District's expanding processing authority. So here, very straightforward, we want to increase the number of permits that are processed through the district through their newly expanded authorization. Very straightforward. We want to amplify that work. Next, identifying growth corridors in specific communities that are ripe for development opportunities. So we want to highlight the work of existing corridors that are implementing smart growth principles. We want to work with municipalities to identify barriers to development. So is there a reason that a site hasn't shifted? Is there a reason why a certain area has gone underinvested in? And can we do things to start to mitigate those challenges? And assisting with multi-municipality zoning updates. So we talked a lot about the county not being able to do this all on their own, but they can establish protocols, they can establish best practices and try to incentivize adherence to them. And so if we can start to see multi-municipality zoning updates, that also starts to foster further interest in investment that might also have a multi-municipality impact. And then we want to examine existing and potential public transit to ensure that it aligns with business and industry growth. So this really thinks about assessing commuter trends, really thinks about, where are the jobs going to be? Where are the employees, where are the workers coming from? And what does transit need to look like to ensure a level of efficiency and a level of access, both benefiting Berks County residents as well as Berks County employers? We also, of course, want to support Amtrak's bus pilot as a new potential model of transportation access. Additionally, this will be a no-brainer to anyone on this call, but we want to support passenger rail expansion. So thinking about the work of the Rail Authority, further supporting that, as well as assessing additional opportunities for transit-oriented development. So this is one of the earliest insights that I think we heard loud and clear from Berks County residents is the need for more passenger rail. Of course, there's a lot of development that has happened over the course of the last year, but we want to continue down that path and ensure that there is an increase in access across the county. And then we want to support growth and positioning of the Reading Regional Airport as a critical economic development asset. That's of course true for the county, but it's true for the region. So proactively attracting major users and tenants. So thinking about the presence of airlines, both that are offering commercial as well as offerings for the average, individual. And then also creating increased use of the airport, inclusive of passenger and business use. So really thinking about, once again, raising awareness of the airport as an asset that can be leveraged, thinking about raising awareness of Berks County's proximity to other major metros, and increasing overall benefit of use of the airport. So metrics and economic indicators, we see quite a few here. On the process metric side of things, of course, we want to identify land or locations that are suitable for development. So if we are going to have more targeted strategies, we have to have a bit of an assessment of where those strategies should be deployed, where those communities and corridors that are ripe for investment. Creation of an infrastructure investment program that supports some projects. So as we identified areas ripe for development, as projects are deployed into those areas, do we have resources to help to bring those projects to bear? Also considering the return on investment relative to those investments. Looking to create incentives to increase multi-municipal planning. So once again, thinking about building that connective tissue in regional collaboration or multi-municipal within county collaboration. And then co-hosting an annual workshop for the 5 regional planning areas to discuss the benefits of multi-municipal planning. So recognizing that one of the objectives of this plan has to be that we get in the regular work of collaborating. So we thought it was really important to have that listed here as sort of something to hold ourselves accountable towards. Are we doing the work to increase that connective tissue, and is it directly connecting across all these other areas of potential impact? On the economic indicator side of things, we want to increase the rate of development within established growth areas, and we would measure that with building permits internal to the county. And then increase in percentage of households with broadband of any type. So of course, the pandemic really taught us a lot about the importance of at-home Wi-Fi and growing importance of broadband access. So we want to see an increase over time of Berks County residents who have at-home broadband access. And of course, that baseline metric is established here. So next up, we want to look at talent and economic mobility. We talk a lot about economic indicators, but at the end of the day, the economy should serve the people That is the county's greatest asset. That is what we have to retain. That is what we hopefully also want to increase over time. Many of these recommendations really talk about increasing an individual's full ability to benefit from and contribute to the county's economy. So that is sort of our core goal. So first up, we want to retain and add workers, prioritizing retention of existing workers, but also creating targeted supports for the unemployed and underemployed. So underemployed, of course, refers to people who might have a job, but it might not fully pay all of their bills. So you might be part-time and you're really trying to get to that 40-hour-a-week mark. So in this area, we want to engage and educate employers to increase connectivity and utilization of workforce development resources. So similar to what we saw with small business owners, and talking to employers, a lot of them were not aware of some of the resources that were available to support them in the work of promoting job opportunities, identifying new talent, but also retention of existing talents, and making sure that there's stronger connectivity between the formal workforce development system and employers and increasing utilization of those resources overall, but also creating a more formal front door to the workforce development system. So similar to the entrepreneurial ecosystem, once again, more formally mapping those resources, identifying entry points, both for job seekers as well as employers, so that they know how to navigate and they can better utilize the system overall. We want to invest and support workforce readiness and upskilling initiatives. So this includes identifying hiring needs from local employers. So really having robust conversations and ongoing dialogue with them to understand what are your needs today, but what are your needs tomorrow as well. So we can start to build pipelines that speak to in-demand skill sets, but that also speak to areas of opportunity for members of our youth, particularly those that are disconnected from education or employment. We also want to identify educational gaps in local training programs. So there are a number of incredible local training programs, but there also are emerging gaps relative to where we see industry shifting and how we know things will evolve over time. So can we identify those gaps now and start to make investments so that we are sort of shoring up the house, so to speak, so that we know local employers will have the talent that they need and Berks County residents can be competitive within the local job market. We want to support businesses in recruiting talent for immediate hiring, retention of current employees, as well as reducing the number of labor force exits. So once again, at the beginning of this presentation, I talked about this 1-to-7 ratio. So for every one job created by industry, we see 7 labor force exits. So we need to do a lot to change that dynamic, which is really what this goal speaks to. We want to engage employers and support organizations to develop more of these workforce pipelines and targets. We want to create new structures that message and communicate career opportunities in Berks County. So if there's a Berks County resident that wants a Berks County job, where do they go to find those? Is there sort of a dedicated resource where people know I can find work in Berks if I go to this job board, to this website, to this social media account? We want to develop targeted attraction and retention programs that match employer needs. This is inclusive of the retention of local college graduates, as well as retirees who might be re-entering the workforce. That's one of the trends we've really been watching coming out of the pandemic. We had a number of people who, of course, left due to the pandemic in 2020 and 21, who are now saying, you know what? I think I'd sort of like to go back, maybe in a different capacity, but there aren't really formal networks to engage those folks. So can we develop some more targeted programs that help to keep our college graduates in Berks, help to get some of those retirees who are interested in coming back in a part-time or full-time capacity, as well as just general members of the labor force, ensuring that we are building structures to get those connections made. We want to market trade and other career opportunities to K-12. The K-12 community. There's a lot of great work that's already being done in this regard, particularly in the manufacturing sphere, but there's more that we could be doing. So continuing to amplify that work. We want to actively recruit new workers to Berks County. So in looking at occupational trends, we saw that Berks really serves as an exporter of talent across the region. A significant percentage of Berks residents who were of prime working age are going elsewhere for their jobs and then coming back home to Berks. So can we reverse that trend and start to have some more folks coming in to fill Berks County jobs as well. And then we want to, of course, support Berks County employers in developing inclusive and welcoming workplaces. So once again, as we think about the increasing diversity of Berks County's population through a demographics lens, and we think about the importance of the Latino community, both in terms of economic impact and population size, we have to ensure that Berks County employers are set up for success in that regard. Are you going to be able to retain a more diverse workforce? Do you have structures that speak to a diverse company culture that is inclusive and that drives a sense of belonging so that you can retain the talent that you need? So making sure that we have programs set up to provide employers with resources in that regard. And last but not least, we want to match disconnected youth and Latino talent with opportunity jobs and pathways to prosperity. These were two groups where we saw a lot of opportunity, both in terms of Latino youth, inclusive of those who might be new Americans, but also those who might be born and raised in Berks, recognizing that there was a bit of disconnection from the job market, so to speak, but also this disconnected youth, which we did see a significant percentage in the Berks County population. Once again, disconnected youth, you might have heard the term opportunity youth used in the past. These are individuals who are frequently between the ages of, 16 and 22, who are disconnected from education or employment. So for both of those groups, we want to increase awareness of career opportunities overall, but we also want to create effective points of entry into the workforce development support system. So once again, if we're mapping this system and create a more of a formal front door of sorts, people understand how to engage, are we also developing points of entry for someone who is a disconnected youth who hasn't been in school for 2 years, hasn't ever held a job and doesn't know where to start? Or for someone who's 16, is a new American, family has landed in Reading and they don't really know which way is up. Are we making sure that the system meets those needs? So on the metrics and indicators side of things, there are quite a few, all of which, at least on this slide, are economic indicators. So we want to see an increase in the percent of people aged 25 and older with a high school diploma or its equivalent. So as it currently stands today, roughly 87% of Berks County population is at that level, but we would like to increase that. The data shows that that was actually forecasted to go down. And so we need to ensure that that number stays high. We want to increase overall available workforce. So as we think about the need to fill jobs, we want to see an increase in the number of people who are available to fill them. Increase in labor force participation rates. So these are basically two halves of a coin. We want to increase the number of people who could fill jobs, and we want to increase the number of people who are filling jobs. Of course, along with that, a decrease in unemployment. We want to see an increase in the number of jobs in priority sectors. So thinking finance and insurance, manufacturing, as well as professional and scientific and technical services. What you should hear in that is a lot of eds and meds. Increase in median earnings, as well as increasing median earnings for full-time year-round workers. So creating a bit of differentiation there. Housing, this was a really big one. So we talked about that mismatch that we see with it relative to housing, and that's both in terms of housing type as well as housing age. We want to address the county's needs for new housing and redeveloped housing that is both accessible and attainable. We use that language instead of the language of affordability because we see lack of units at all levels of the funnel. So it's not just affordable units that are lacking, it's also units that are at the very top of the funnel. Premium housing is also lacking in Berks County. So we need to ensure that at every level of housing demand, we have stock that matches the need. So first up, we want to assess and address the mismatch, of course, between housing stock, including age, price point, type, and location. So promotion of development in accordance with the smart growth principles, what the county is already advancing. Promoting awareness of the housing gap, particularly for that higher end housing need. One of the things that we were really fascinated to see in our analysis was because we were missing some offerings in this higher end area, those folks or pushing down into what we might consider mid-tier offerings and sucking up a lot of that inventory, which meant people who might have been in that mid-tier range are sucking up things that might be considered affordable housing, creating a real crunch here at the very bottom. So we have to ensure that we have enough supply at all levels so that we don't see this sort of trickle down effect that's really creating a bit of a crunch for many members of the community. We want to incentivize development that's in line with our supply requirements. And we also want to explore opportunities to implement best practices in zoning and planning. So can we turn a sort of strategic eye to the way we're thinking about housing creation and housing development? Within this conversation, we realized it would be really great to have an individual who is living and breathing Berks County housing on a daily basis. So prioritizing a staff position to develop and coordinate the variety of strategies and plans and rehabilitation programs that should result from this work. And then, of course, acceleration and completion of already approved but stalled housing plans. So we heard a lot about a number of plans that were sort of pending indefinitely that hadn't really been brought forth to completion. So can we identify those and accelerate those and bring them to fruition? Next, we want to promote adaptive reuse and redevelopment of obsolete commercial and industrial properties. So once again, we need to maximize the assets that we have, and we need to utilize as many tools that we have to get there. So utilizing federal, state, and local programs for housing rehabilitation, particularly targeting Main Street corridors and municipalities across the county, as well as downtown revitalization. We want to review assessment requirements to minimize carrying costs. So we heard a good bit from developers about things being prohibitively expensive, and that being one reason why they were not investing as heavily in Berks. So can we review those requirements and make sure that we're not disincentivizing investment in the county? And then participation in a land bank to prioritize the redevelopment of blighted properties in the city. So can we help to really shift some of those properties that have just been sitting and haven't been leveraged in any way? Can we ship them off to the sidelines, put them in a land bank, and really generate some activity in that way? So on metrics and indicators, from a process perspective, once again, we want to prioritize that full-time staff person. So that is sort of a, have we done it? Yes or no? Did we check the box? We also want to create this housing investment program to accelerate the development in line with our housing needs. Of course, thinking about ROI for the county with that investment. So have we done that? Yes or no? On the economic indicator side of things, we want to increase total housing starts, looking at that on an annual basis. We want to decrease the number of cost burden households. So cost burden refers to someone that is spending more than 30% of their monthly income on housing expenses. Severely cost burdened would refer to someone who is paying 50% or more of their monthly income on housing expenses. And so there are roughly 44,000 households in Berks County today that have cost burdened status, which is quite significant. We want to see an increase in total number of rental units. So we know, of course, not everyone is ready for home ownership or interested in home ownership. So we need significant rental stock to match that reality. But we also want to see an increase in, once again, that higher value owner housing. If we can solve the crunch at the bottom, we can likely solve the crunch in other areas. So placemaking. Investing in and highlighting community assets that provide access to a variety of arts, culture, green space, recreation opportunities for all residents and future residents. So really thinking about Berks County as an awesome place to live. How do we enhance that? How do we raise awareness of that? What are the steps that it would take to ensure that people look to Berks County as somewhere that they might want to live one day or live tomorrow? So we want to fund enhancements to new and existing public spaces across the county, prioritizing both green space as well as inclusive gathering space. So some of this would be leveraging the existing Greenway Parks and Rec plan to prioritize fund improvements in the creation of new public amenities. We want to, of course, review accessibility and distribution of these assets. So we want to ensure that the assets that we currently have and any assets that we might be bringing on board are accessible and have been sort of equitably distributed across the county. And we want to develop plans for ongoing investment and maintenance of public spaces. So something that we often see with plans is we talk a lot about the creation of something new, but we don't talk a whole lot about the maintenance of something new. And we have to make sure both of those things happen. We also want to support Main Street and commercial district revitalization programs. So looking for promising practices such as potential zoning updates that might encourage new models of revitalization, enhancing commercial district connections with arts, culture, and recreation. So really thinking about activating some of our strategic corridors in commercial areas. Bringing together municipalities to make connections and to provide support for Main Street and commercial district revitalization. So really sort of galvanizing a cohort that might be thinking about this. And then supporting investment in safety measures like facade improvements, lighting and streetscape improvements, et cetera, things that add to both the safety and look and feel of a community. We want to continue investments in the trail systems, of course, creating more integration both within the systems themselves. Sorry, my dog has decided to join the meeting. Integrating the trails, but also thinking about integration within community. And then analyzing the possibility to expand trail system use beyond recreation. So this is one of the things we heard from residents who talked a good bit about increasing sort of their ability to use trail systems to bike home, for example, on their way back from work. So thinking about areas of possibility relative to some of those commuter traveling patterns that we saw in the research. We want to develop a cohesive and collaborative Berks County message along with shared I'm sorry, y'all. We want to develop a cohesive and collaborative Berks County message along with shared marketing resources. And so one of the things that we sort of talked a good bit about is there were a number of different brands that talked about Berks as a county, that talked about the relative region that Berks is in. And all of those had different taglines, different look and feels. And so it could create some confusion relative to where we're actually talking about. So we wanted to find opportunities to create a little bit more collaboration so that there was more of a central look and feel that spoke to the community and the county overall. So here we want to clearly define and embrace Berks County identity, showing more diversity, thinking about representation. We want to create more of that unified talent recruitment message. So if people are considering Berks County, they're looking at a job opportunity, we want to make sure that there is a clear message that is integrated across all parties who are doing that work that speaks strongly and clearly in one voice about Berks County. And we want to increase cross-promotion of county attractions and events. So, you know, making sure that there is more of that sort of integrated collaboration happening on a regular basis. So on the metrics and indicators side of things, we want to invest $250,000 into the recommendations coming out of the Greenway Parks and Recreation Plan. Of course, increasing access to green space assets that are all included in those plans recommendations. We want to convene community leaders to identify priority projects who can collaboratively seek funding to do some of those Main Street improvements, beautification programs, investments in commercial districts and strategic corridors. We want to increase trail system connections, and of course, the creation of that coordinated messaging. So these are all not really economic indicators, but they are programmatic things that over the course of this plan, we want to see come to fruition. So once again, we've talked a bit about this being a 5-year plan. So you'll see timeline indicators throughout the contents of the plan that correspond with the strategies that we've reviewed. But this is a living, breathing plan. And so some of the things that have been included as strategic priorities may not make sense 2 years from now, 3 years from now, or we may say, you know what? This new funding opportunity has emerged at the federal level. We might want to tweak it this way, or there's all this great activity in this new area that did not exist when we had this conversation on June 30th, 2022. And we need to add some nuance to the way we were thinking about this strategy. So over the course of this 5-year horizon, we want to ensure that we are transparently communicating the plan's progress, but also transparently communicating the things that may emerge as new priorities or may be deprioritized over time based on what we are seeing in our economy and based on what we're seeing in the broader landscape. Pam, would love to hand things over to you to talk about sort of bringing things from vision into reality.
Thank you so much, Victoria. So as we're in implementation, and what's very interesting is that though the county commissioners are on deck to formally adopt our plan a little bit later this summer, we've already begun a number of the year one implementation strategies. So this becomes while we were developing our strategic plan, great things were happening while we were planning. And I think that's one of the beauties of Berks County. Things didn't stop just because we decided to enter into a planning process, and capturing all of the great things that are happening and tethering them together has been a challenge, but a very good challenge that we've had in this process. So for example, the county is about to announce some allocations of funds that we were able to make available to the community because we received American Rescue Plan dollars. Talk about a once in a lifetime opportunity to have some financial resources in our community and to be able to look at the needs that came in and were identified to us and aligning them with what's coming out of this plan, which really is a comprehensive look, as you heard about all of those focus areas between housing and entrepreneurship and business growth. There will be projects that are funded that relate very specifically to trail connectivity, Main Street redevelopment, a focus on opportunity jobs. All of those things will be coming about. There's about $5.7 million of what will be approved this evening by the commissioners out of about $18 million that are very specifically related to our year one implementation strategies in Imagine Berks. We're also setting up implementation teams. They're referred to quite a bit in our plan. Again, not all led by the county. Some are county facilitated. In some instances, the county is a partner, but these implementation teams will be working on making sure, as our slide right now says, taking the vision to reality, and also the ability to be able to establish metrics and report back to the community on a regular basis. Are we doing well? Aren't we doing so well? Do we need to refocus? All of those things will be dynamically looked at as we go through, especially year one of the plan. So again, I just at this point want to take a minute to thank the county commissioners for their leadership on this and their willingness to be able to put resources towards a collaborative and focused effort with partners in our community. So I know there's been a little bit of dialogue in the chat.
Yep, and we're going to stimulate some more, I hope. Pam and Victoria, thank you. This is, it's incredible. There's no other word to say for it. Let me start with a couple commercials, if I can, quickly about a couple of things that I know that are going on. The commissioners have launched a project to expand broadband access in the county, and working on a strategic plan that fits into some of this. It is an important infrastructure. I'd like to try to encourage people to respond to the survey that the county commissioners released, so we can get some idea where the gaps and holes are in that network. The strategic plan can begin to help fill those holes in the system, because broadband has become almost as essential as electricity and water. So that's available. I think it's on the county website. You should be able to find it there. Maybe we can post exactly where it is for people to know. The other thing is there's a small group of people working on business supports for small business and entrepreneurs, creating what we're calling an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I know the county has been very interested in that. And I want to, there's also a planning process going for that. And hopefully this fall we'll bring that together. It's not that we don't have a network that supports small businesses and entrepreneurs in Berks County, but we need to do more and to make more effective use of those resources. Let me start with a couple process questions if I can. How are you going to identify the strategy champions, Pam? Who are they? How do people volunteer to help with that?
In the plan itself, in our document, we have very specific, along with the implementation strategy, the action steps underneath it. And we have already identified those in which the county may play a lead and those in which the partner may play a lead and the county is playing that supporting role. We're still putting the finishing touches on that. But Dave, one of the things we did in our draft process was reach out to those partners and said, does what we're doing align with your current mission? Or could it align with a tweak to your mission and vision for your own organization? And it was really a wonderful experience to be able to reach out to those partners and say, you know, we're not going to put something out there and attach your name to it if you're not willing to be that lead partner. And so, Dave, a lot of that work has already been being done behind the scenes, but, you know, not behind a cloak. That will all become part of it as we announce the adoption of the plan.
So when the plan is finalized, there should be some more identification of who those people would be.
Absolutely.
How do if people haven't been involved in that process, Pam, how do the organizations that are here in this crowd of people that we've got watching this, how can they become active and support the plan? How can they collaborate?
Sure. In a very simple way, you can certainly go to the Imagine Berks website. We will continue to keep that activated and utilize it as a reporting out tool to the community so that we've got some real-time information on there. And though we probably haven't utilized it as well as we could have during our planning process, there are a lot of things we're very focused on. That is absolutely something that we want to pay attention to as a communication tool. So if you want to be more engaged than just receiving information, I would really encourage you to certainly reach out to our project team members, to myself, or to Derek, David, Ashley, Jeremy, Ken, because we really look forward to as much engagement as possible.
And let me ask a question about the metrics, because you showed metrics for each one of the target areas. How are they going to be used? How is it going to be made public about the progress being made in those different metrics?
So our intent is to do an annual report out. Metrics have been a little bit tough, and Victoria, I see you shaking your head. Yes, we really had to dig in and say, we've got to be able to find those things that are measurable. And then in what time period does the information and data come out to allow us to measure where we've established this baseline? So we certainly won't be foolproof, but we're very committed to saying, we're going to lay out what we can measure and do an annual report out to the community. And right now, and not associated with the Commonwealth's budget, but we'll probably use July 1 as that start date so that our year one of implementation truly starts tomorrow. And as I've shared with you already, we've already started. The commissioners have been very excited to see these pieces come together and very excited to see the collaborative and cooperative relationships that will be highlighted and featured as part of the implementation.
One of the things that was mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation, Victoria, was about the availability of land. And there were a couple questions about, does that include agricultural land, or is agricultural land sort of excluded from that 20, I think it was 22% figure? Can you elucidate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So it would include some agricultural land, but not all. So basically what we found in land use is that in our land use assessment was that there was some land that was preserved, but that wasn't actively being leveraged in a commercial capacity to contribute to the Berks County economy. So that 22% is inclusive of some ag-related economic activity, but it also is, of course, inclusive of the other commercial activity relative to the county as well.
Bringing the trains back is going to have some significant economic impact, but it's also going to have some land use impacts, and there's going to be a need to deal with that. Has the county done any thinking about how it wants to play in transit-oriented development? A large part of that's going to occur in the city, but not necessarily all of it.
Dave, that's a great question. So as the Schuylkill River Passenger Rail Authority kicks off its inaugural meeting next week, we have a couple things to I's to dot and T's to cross along the way, but transit-oriented development is not something that has always been top of mind in Berks County, and is absolutely something that the county would like to act as a resource. But one thing I want to say, we are here to support the city in its endeavors to really identify what that means for them. What land use policies do they have to take a look at? What decisions and analysis can we help with as they're determining how this works best for them? You know, Dave, I also did see a question pop up about the city's plan. We were so appreciative of the city's involvement in our plan. And we recognize that though their Downtown Plus plan was not formally adopted, that we stand ready to incorporate actions and identified implementation strategies that come out of that plan to incorporate into the Imagine Berks plan. We're very respectful of that. And again, at this point in time, we can't thank the city enough for their involvement in helping us to work through our Imagine Berks planning process. So sorry, a little bit of a roundabout answer, but the county will stand ready and willing to act as a resource.
I think you raise a very significant development that I think is encouraging for everybody here, and that's the willingness of the county and the city to work together, the county to support the city instead of that's the city's problem, that's the county's problem. Hopefully that fosters a lot of activity going forward. Let me get to the housing thing. You're going to hire somebody to do a lead on housing. We keep hearing some of the challenges are zoning or school districts not wanting to let more kids come to the schools. Obviously, there's a lot of the housing stock in Berks County is old, particularly the city, but if I remember right, the number is really high in terms of the housing stock that's 50 to 70 years old. Are there, I know it's probably early because you haven't hired the housing director yet, but are there thoughts about what we can do to deal with, and how much of a problem are these codes and zoning issues as part of that challenge? How much of it is encouraging people to think about building up instead of building out?
Yeah, there was an awful lot captured in that.
Yeah, it's a big ramble.
So I'm going to date myself a little bit. One of the project team members here, Ken Pick of the County Redevelopment Authority, he and I have been at this quite a bit of time. We blew the dust off of a plan that was generated quite some time ago, 1993. And there was a Berks Community Housing Council at that time. And as we were going through this planning process, you know, we had a lot of conversations about, we haven't lifted this up and treated it in the same way that we did all of these years ago. And we really need to lift it back up and elevate housing to the point where we talk about being able to develop proactive strategies and really give thoughtfulness to redevelopment and adaptive reuse within our boroughs, because that really does align with where we're headed in terms of wanting to apply smart growth principles. So there's a lot of pieces to that, Dave, across the board. And we, like, for example, one of the things we want to do is go back and look at plans that may have been approved. So Dave, they got through that local municipal planning process, but yet haven't been able to move forward in terms of putting a shovel in the ground. Let's look at those first, because there was at one point in time a willing municipality and planning commission. And one of the things we want to look at is, how do we get the best possible projects that we can get, understanding that we also are committing to maintaining our quality of life here, which a huge component of that is our open space and our conserved areas and preserved areas. And how do we embrace that and still be able to create this unmet need, meet this unmet need, so that we can continue to meet the needs of our current residents and meet the needs of our residents yet to be.
That emphasis in the plan about greenways and creative placemaking is very significant, very important. It's one of the challenges. We've got this great asset in having a river that nobody looks at. It's treated as sort of the back door rather than the front door. Any thoughts about where that might go to? What kind of role will the county play in that? I mean, I know there's a lot of property in the city that's not owned by the county, obviously, but there's some potential there. The county's taking on some lead in terms of the dealing with the pedestrian bridge, which could be made into an asset rather than a liability.
Mm-hmm.
How does that fit into the strategic plan?
I think those things are very important. We've identified in our implementation strategy a number of things like that. That trail connectivity, you know, some of those missing pieces are absolutely identified as a priority for us. And Victoria mentioned that we want to look at those as not just a recreational asset, but the potential for there to be a walk to work or bike to work or some level that's allowing our residents to also use those trail connections as a mode of transportation. And so I think that it's something that we're committed to, because that is a bit of an easy one for us to identify that. But the update to the Greenways plan is underway now. And so we're giving ourselves a little bit of latitude to say, we know we have to commit additional resources to the priorities that are identified in the Greenways plan. So we're leaving ourselves a little bit of room there to incorporate those strategies that are identified in the Greenway plan also.
I wonder if you could also go a little bit more in depth about what we're going to be doing in terms of opportunity occupations, workforce development, obviously retaining the people we get here, but there's some interesting opportunities that are emerging here. There's talent here that have skills but may not have the credentials. How does that all fit into what you're planning to do? What's the workforce development board going to be doing? Those kinds of things. If you could just go a little bit more in detail about that.
Sure, and it's more than just our workforce development board. It is really tethering together a lot of individual programs. I have met and held conversations with folks in the past few weeks as we've held in-depth conversations about disconnected youth, and I have learned a whole new alphabet soup that I actually wasn't previously aware of. But it also pointed to the fact that there's a lot of great things happening. And we've got to identify where is the best place to put our resources that ends up with a meaningful outcome also to our existing Berks County employers, and recognizing what their very specific needs are. And so you will see just a little bit of foreshadowing that the county is committed to putting resources and time and energy to this concept of not only disconnected youth, but also a disconnected resident that hasn't yet found their way into that opportunity job pathway. And some of that also, Dave, is related to our healthcare industry. And we have seen wages increase there that can allow an opportunity job pathway for someone that may not have been previously available to them. So, and interestingly enough, that as an opportunity job also aligns with what we've identified as high priority occupations. So a lot of tethering, a lot of pulling together is taking place right now.
And there's a lot of interaction between different elements of this. You talked a little bit about diversity and inclusion, and that is both a challenge and an opportunity for Berks County. Are there specific strategies that you're thinking about putting in place for building on the diverse population we have and getting people more inclusive, more engaged?
And Victoria, I'm going to ask you a little bit, because one of the things that Victoria mentioned, and we probably need to talk a little bit more about, is how we were taking that issue of DEI and weaving it throughout the components of our plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So there were two major areas where I think you see a lot of the DEI related work pop up. One is sort of some of what Pam was just referencing relative to the work of workforce development. So ensuring that there are pathways of connection for individuals who are coming from racial and ethnic minority communities to gain access to employment and those opportunity jobs that we've discussed. So ensuring that there is a level of connectivity and awareness, but also preparation. And that, of course, can take a number of facets. Similarly, we think about interactions with employers, and that's both in terms of that awareness generation and connectivity with organizations that represent respective communities, whether we're talking about the Latino community, the African community, the Black community, et cetera, or others. But also thinking about internal to their organizations, are they set up for success? As we see the demographics changing within the broader population, the demographics should be changing within their internal worker populations as well. So are they set up to be an inclusive workplace? Do they understand what that entails? If there are issues related to cultural dissonance, for example, do you have proper support set up internally to deal with those things, whether in your HR departments or otherwise? Also thinking about opportunities for peer-to-peer learning. So are there employers that are further down the pathway with this type of work than others, and can they sort of reach back to their fellow peers and sort of help to bring them up to speed and carry them along the way? So as a project team, we've discussed a lot of opportunities in this area, but at the end of the day, on both fronts, it really deals with sort of getting arm in arm with community and understanding what the needs are, understanding what really would make a difference. Where are there already assets and organizations doing great work? Where are we seeing the needle already moving? And where are there massive gaps? And are there areas of opportunity to either provide resource and funding for an organization to fill that gap? Or are there unique roles that the county and its various affiliates can play that help to do more of that tethering that Pam was talking about, specific to the work of DEI?
Yeah, I know there are a number of employers in the county, and some outside, but hire a lot of people in the county who have been very intentional about how they do this. One of the things that COVID highlighted was the importance of childcare and access to early childhood education. And there didn't seem to be any mention of that. Is that something that you thought about, or is it somebody else's job to do? Or both?
You never want to say, boy, that's somebody else's job. We're not concerned about that. Dave, one of the things you point to is, if COVID pointed to anything, it's going back to some of the root causes of what is a preventer of allowing people to enter that workforce. And I think more so than anything during the pandemic, that this issue of childcare, which was already an issue pre-pandemic, really there was a spotlight shining on that once we were trying to figure out, what happens when that resource or support system is not available to you. And Dave, I will say that component piece of early childhood education, which I think is complicated and probably not best served as the county as a lead on that one, that the county needs to recognize it again as a root cause of potentially, again, limiting folks from entering the workforce. But I think we need to be at the table. But I do think that the lead is better served by entities other than county government.
Right. One of the things, Victoria, you mentioned was the concept of encouraging people to buy local. And I think we really could build on that a lot more. Was there any thought given to trying to encourage businesses in the county to encourage their supply chains to localize, to become seated here in Berks County?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we do touch on that a little bit in the narrative. I think, what you'll see in the plan, there are these sort of specific strategies and action steps that the county is committing to, but there also are best practice examples and narratives sort of describing the types of things that could occur relative to that particular sphere. And there is a little bit of copy relative to that. I think nationally, best practice, you do see an eye towards some of that local procurement, local spend, not just with local government, but also with anchor institutions and larger scale business entities who have a little bit more spending power, whether that is them developing, pathways for spend and procurement with local businesses, or them developing resources to sort of incubate smaller businesses who might be in their industry or adjacent to their industry, right? So what we talk about a little bit in the plan is that everyone really has a role to play in fostering this environment in which everyone is thriving economically. So absolutely spot on.
There are organizations in the community, in the county, that are willing to put money on the table for different types of projects. How have you been able to identify who some of those funding partners might be and how they might be engaged? People trying to come up with an integrated strategy, and how do we allocate the resources to do these things in a more efficient, more effective way?
We have started to identify some of those. Again, I did a little bit of foreshadowing of some of the action that the county will take, but the county is also going to be taking action that leverages other private resources, which I think is very exciting. Bringing both of those together to have that impact is really important to the success of the plan. And I think we're going to continue to identify them. The county committed several months ago to hiring a grants coordinator, and Kara Mayo, and I don't know if Kara's on the call right now or not. I have a couple too many boxes to look at, but Kara's job is to go out and be that resource connector. And she's, we tasked her with how do we deploy dollars into our community effectively, and she's done an outstanding job of identifying really wonderful projects where we're going to be able to put some resources. But those projects are not moving forward without additional funding components, be they, on the infrastructure side, on the programmatic side, whatever that may be. And I think it's really a wonderful experience to be seeing the county dollars being able to fill some funding gaps, and in other instances, being the catalyst for funds to be spent in the community. So a lot more to come,
One of the challenges, Pam, that I can see is trying to think of creative ways to get partners to come to the table. I know other communities that have had to wrestle with housing issues, for instance. The employers actually stepped up and helped provide housing. The childcare issue that we talked about, there have been things where employers have tried to help with that. Have you had any conversations, any thoughts about how do you get people to think a little bit more creatively and expansively in terms of how they can engage in this process?
Well, I think our implementation teams will be very, I'm going to use the word cross-collaborative. They are really going to involve not only nonprofit organizations, but for-profit organizations, businesses. And I'll tell you, Dave, you've set an excellent example as Berks Alliance. You are a master facilitator and a master of bringing people to the table. So I'm going to follow your lead, Dave. And, sometimes you also, you don't get if you don't ask. People have been so responsive. And I think the reason that they've been responsive and willing to come to the table is because we've been very clear. This is not an academic exercise. As you heard Victoria present, I think it was very clear. This was not an academic exercise for the county. This was let's hit the ground running. Let's look at our real world opportunities, but also our real world challenges too. And so, as a result of that, of putting things in that context and bringing people to the table who previously haven't been asked what their thoughts are, that we're going to continue that. And we're going to continue that in our implementation teams. So I've been very blessed to work with an incredible team and group of people on this. And I'm very excited that the county commissioners had the thoughtfulness to take the lead on this, because it was not an easy task, but I think it's going to be an incredibly worthwhile planning and communication tool for Berks County.
I agree with you. I think it's really heroic, may not be the right word, but it seems to be heroic for the commissioners to take this on and for them to charge you guys with this responsibility. And it's an ambitious plan but it can really give us a better imagination of what Berks County might be over time. I think one of the things that should be supportive for the county and the county commissioners as we move ahead with this is the fact that so many people are interested in this conversation today, and I think are willing to engage and help and support. I think just ask, and I think people will join. So Pam, Victoria, thank you. Great event. We're excited about it. We're excited to see the final report when it comes out. We understand that July is a time for people to take some time off from what they've been doing. So that might delay things a little bit, but it sounds like if we can do 90% of it, it'd be a miracle and it'd be great. So thank you both very much for this.
No, Dave, thank you so much. And I realized I didn't mention it earlier. I know I went through that presentation quickly. You'll be able to find the presentation later today at imagineberks.org.
Okay, and we will send the actual PowerPoint that you share with us out to everybody, and along with the recording, so they'll have a copy of that as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are going to be like the county commissioners and take July off, but we'll be back in August. So we will see you for a community forum then. Thank you, everybody. Really exciting stuff. Great opportunities for Berks County and for all of us.